At a school like Stanford, I'm sure you need to do more. So we're going to spend the next
maybe not?
hour and a half together. And what I really want to do is just start by telling a little bit of, your story to everybody, and then have them get to know your journey, and then talk about some of the cool stuff you're doing now, stuff in the future, and thoughts on lots of stuff. So maybe just if you could give a quick bio intro of overall, and then we're going to kind of go back to the start of the journey for you.
That sounds great. So the very general, what would be the lead sentence in my bio? It would probably be, I'm a social entrepreneur, and most of my work over the last decade, although it's really 11 years-ish now, but I'm saying decade to feel a little younger, has been focused on social justice and financial inclusion, and sharing economy-related stuff with the Collaborative Fund. Is that a good, one? Well, and do you want me to do, bullet points as well?
Whatever you like, yeah.
And the thing that more people would know than any other thing that I've participated in is that I was a co-founder of Kiva. We were the first person-to-person lending site. We started the same week as Prosper, way back in October of 2005. But of course, we were a micro-lending site. Kiva is currently still a micro-lending site focused on poverty alleviation. So a slightly different twist than Prosper. And that's the main, I guess I'd say that's the thing that I get asked about most often, that started my journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I'm going to brag for Jessica for a second, because my guess is she's too humble to say most of her full dossier, but really active in politics, studied poli-sci, got your MBA at Stanford, co-founded Kiva, which is, obviously one of the most recognizable tech companies and one of the leading things, in terms of social inclusion, in terms of what we've been doing in entrepreneurship. Really active in the World Economic Forum, right? That's a pretty big deal. Partner, and involved in Collaborative Fund, investing in companies. Founder of ProFounder.
Yes.
Right?
You're doing a great job. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. And working on a whole bunch of new stuff. For those of you also that don't know, Jessica's husband, who's here with us, Reza, is a very famous and well-known author. You should definitely check out his books and his stuff. Maybe we'll ask you a couple questions as well here tonight.
He's my arm candy, but he's also very intelligent.
Yes. All right, so let's start back at the beginning. You grew up in Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Right?
Outside of Pittsburgh. I was born in Oil City, Pennsylvania. And if anyone is from Oil City, I will hug you right now. But it's a few hundred people, so I doubt that would be the case. And then
it's actually called Oil City.
How many? I don't know. I have no idea, actually. Yeah, and then I grew up outside in a suburb outside of Pittsburgh.
Was your family entrepreneurial?
So I'm going to make this, I'll keep this concise because Reza knows I'm obsessed with my family. I'm so grateful for them. My mom is an educator. Mostly she has taught first grade for the last 40 years. But she's one of these magical people who almost every year her first graders at the end of the year will be, reading at a third grade level and doing math at a fourth grade level and crazy stuff. She's kind of the, the kid whisperer. And then my dad is, he's an entrepreneur in his own way, and he's this dreamer. And I feel like he really has inspired me over the years to follow those what if questions and try to put them into action. So that's and then my brother's a pastor, which means that I am the bad kid. So.
When you were young, did you think of, did you have the entrepreneurial bug? Obviously you were probably really ambitious and driven at a young age. When you were going to high school, what did you think that you were going to do with your life?
So I thought I would be a public servant of some sort. I probably couldn't have even spelled the word entrepreneurship until, way after college. I definitely didn't see myself as an entrepreneur per se. I thought that if you were an entrepreneur, you were a business person, like traditional business, and that business was about making money and think, I don't know, Scrooge McDuck, diving into his pile of coins. I thought business was bad, business was selfish, business was about taking, and I wanted to be on the other team. I wanted to be the giving, focused on real problems kind of team. That's what I thought.
And
So I
where
figured
did
that
the-
was nonprofits. I thought business was bad, nonprofits were good, and I've obviously changed my tune. But so that's where I thought I was headed, to the nonprofit side of things, the social sector. And it's funny when you define your path as non, right, as not something else. It's kind of tricky to figure out what that actually means.
So when you finished up college, you were student body president at your university.
I
So you're
was.
really active.
I
You were that
was.
person.
I was that person.
And-
I was not very much fun in college. I think I'm more fun now, but I was not fun in college.
What?
I was like the rule. I was also an RA, and I was an
Oh.
RA in the. Okay, so the way it works in Pennsylvania, apparently, I know. I'm sorry, this is a tangent, but I've never done this tangent before in any kind of talk or interview, so I'm going to do it to see what happens. So
The red wine's gonna help.
I know.
Let's keep bringing it
Actually,
out.
You tell me. You tell me when to stop. So apparently, if you have like a certain number of women, like in a house, there's some weird rule about brothels in Pennsylvania, and so all the sororities had to live in one big dorm together. And I'm sorry, this is a little bit irrelevant, but I was the RA, and so I had to go around to like the sororities and tell them to like quiet down. And you would have not been excited to see me in college.
At least you weren't the RA that stuck around for 5 years longer, right? I think everyone
That's
had
true.
that RA
That's
that
true.
was like 28 years old, and so like, hey, what are we gonna do today? So you finished college.
I did. I studied philosophy and political science
Yeah.
and poetry and
Yeah.
not business.
Great, super marketable skills.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do right after undergrad?
So I accidentally joined a bit of a cult. It was totally by accident, but I went to do this internship in DC, and then it turns out to be a little much. And so then I moved to California somewhat on a whim. I was like dating a boy in California, and my parents were freaked out. But my super smart.
Do you mean
career-
something that had like cult-like tendencies, or a real cult?
It's we probably shouldn't. They're probably listening. I'm just kidding. No, I ended up doing I made this internship up with a handful of friends, and it turned out to be super intense. And we would do these experiments. So, oh my gosh, should I go into this? Yeah, but I don't know if I want to say. Should I go there? But do you think anyone will know what that means?
People know what C Street.
Do you know what who here knows what C Street is?
Why don't you explain it for everybody?
No. Do you know what that is? Okay, so it's look. Okay, I'm going to say this with love in my heart. So,
Quicksand Home.
no, stop it. Reza knows too much. So basically, I worked with a group of individuals, and the way that this internship that we were kind of made up unfolded, we would do these like crazy experiments. We would look at different scriptures in the Bible, and we would say, oh, well, we should just travel to a town and see who welcomes us in, and then stay with them and try to evangelize to them. It was very super hardcore Christian stuff, and I did that, and it was a wonderful growth experience. And then I quit, and I moved to California because I was in love with a boy. Really strategic career move. And I ended up getting a temp job at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And I swear to you, even after the cult experience, I feared for my soul being like a temp admin at the business school at Stanford, because I thought these guys are bad, like business is bad. And so by day, I went and I alphabetized things. And then by night, I lived in East Palo Alto in this house for teen moms. I really have already had too much wine. Sorry about this. I apologize generally for the next hour. But I lived in this. I was the house mom, and I lived with these teenagers, and they're awesome, and they're wonderful kids and babies, and made sure that they did their homework and the babies got to bed on time. And then I would take them to daycare in high school in the morning, and then I would go to Stanford and do my my other work that I was very guarded about. But
Yeah,
I
that
ended
capitalistic
up being, I know,
alphabetizing.
no, I was very worried. I was worried that I was around people who were like the bad guys. But it turns out that I just so happened, thank goodness, to land at the business school in this place called the Center for Social Innovation, where every day people were walking through those doors and thinking about how to solve social problems using business skills and entrepreneurial thinking. And I felt like I found my people who had the heart and were applying this interesting way of thinking about it to solve these problems. So I stuck around for actually almost 3 years. And then I'm just going to fast forward to one of the good parts, I think, of my story. One day after work, I stayed late to hear this gentleman named Muhammad Yunus speak. And I sat in the back of this classroom that held like 50 people. This was fall of '03, 3 years before Yunus and his Grameen Bank would win the Nobel Peace Prize. it was just this guy that was apparently the banker, this banker to the poor, which sounded very sketchy to me. So I sat in the back. Like, whatever, I'll just hang here for a few minutes and see what he has to say. But it was one of these life-changing moments because I learned about microfinance. I learned about this guy who had started his incredible journey by doing something very simple. He I don't know if anybody here has heard him speak, but he talks about his work in an incredibly approachable way. I mean, for a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Maybe we'll just take,
Like,
I think a lot of people
do you
know,
want me
but
to do Microfinance 101?
yeah, let's do that for a moment.
I'm with you. Okay, so think financial services and products for the poor. Think of all the things you access at your bank and imagine how those might be tailored to a person living on a few dollars a day. So, who doesn't have a bank? Right, who might not even have a bank. So,
But just to put some context, we're not talking when we say poor, it's not even the context of the United States. It's folks that are living on a couple, maybe $1 or $2 a day, and they're getting a loan for $25, and from
or
that,
$5 or
Yeah.
$10, yes, to continue their business activities,
Yeah.
whether they're a goat herder or a seamstress or a farmer or a fisherman or something very basic that they're
Yeah.
just surviving on.
and really fascinating. One of the really fascinating things about microlending, as I learned it was some of the highest payback rates of anything you'd ever see. These folks that were living in abject poverty, the percentage they would pay back what they were given is higher than any other.
Yeah.
I
mean, on Kiva, it's almost 99%. It's 98.7.8. It changes, but we'll get to that, I guess. But
What was it about Eunice's speech and what he was saying? What struck you at that moment?
so he talked about microfinance and specifically not just microfinance. Think of that as like the umbrella term, right? You have savings and small loans, small savings accounts, microinsurance, all sorts of interesting products and services. But microcredit, the small loan, really is what he focused on in his talk, and it spoke to me. And I thought, wow, this infusion of a little bit of money at the right time into the right hands is magical. It can totally change the trajectory of somebody's life. Somebody who's working really hard already, doing everything right, they just need access to this capital to grow their business activities. And it was sort of this, wow, I never heard of that before, and I wanted to learn more. And that was only part of it. He also talked about his own story in a very accessible way. Here I was, this like kind of ex-cult person, philosophy major, like I had no idea what to put on my resume. And he had started his great work in the world by sitting down and talking with people and asking them directly what their needs were and responding in, retrospectively, kind of a common sense way, giving them loans that were, not crazy, not at crazy interest rates, but giving them fair access to capital, even if it was only a few dollars at a time. And I thought maybe I was very naive, but
How old were you at the
I
time?
was 22, 23.
Wow.
I thought maybe I could do that too. Maybe I could sit down with people that I wanted to serve and listen really carefully to them. And if I listened carefully enough, maybe I could respond in a way that other people had missed that would be helpful. But the most important thing was he talked about poverty. He talked about the people that he served.
I'm going to do a side tangent,
Yeah, do a
just for a
tangent,
second, because I'm actually
yeah.
kind of curious.
Okay,
So, at 22, you're thinking about
23.
22, 23, you're thinking
Ish.
about how you're changing
Yeah,
the
23.
world. Do you think it's something innate in folks that certain people like you at a young age are thinking about, hey, how can I make the world better? Because you are not living the typical life of a 22 or 23-year-old girl in California. And is that part of your upbringing? Is that something you think you're born with? Is that part of the socialization? Why? What leads to that?
I feel very strongly about this. I think we all have that. I think we all are born with that. I think my 3 boys, they all want to be superheroes. They all think they can fly when they jump off the couch, et cetera, which is very troubling. But I think we're all born with this desire to be important in other people's lives and to help and to live a life of meaning. And I think it's how much do you get beaten down along the way? How much do you allow yourself to believe other stories about what your life is limited to? How much do you choose not to take risks and try things that may not pay in the traditional currency of money, but may pay in other ways, like adventure and fun and joy and meaningful relationships and that sort of thing. So I think we're all born with that. And I think I was very, very lucky to grow up in a family where the barriers were either pushed away or talked out of me or just I really think that I just was super blessed and super lucky to not get that desire to help and be useful in the world sort of pushed aside. And, I guess, yeah.
All right. So where do you take things? You're 23. You've
Yeah.
heard Eunice give the speech that it really affects you.
Yeah.
Where do you go from there on your professional
Okay,
path?
so this other part that I wanted to say, the other thing about how he talked about his work was he spoke about people who, yes, had economic need, but who were smart and hardworking and strong and were doing all the right things. They just needed access to this capital, like I said. And that was a very different story of poverty than I had heard from a lot of well-intentioned nonprofits growing up. I heard a story that was based on suffering and sadness and desperation and, hey, we need you, the would-be donor, to swoop in and help. And that made me feel terrible when I heard those stories. I felt guilty and like shameful about my own relative middle-class American wealth. And here was a story about amazing people who could be business partners, and all they needed was access to this capital. And it changed things for me. It opened me up in a way that I hadn't been opened up in a long time. So I quit my job. I moved to East Africa. I started to work. It was like an unpaid internship where I more or less broke even. But I begged my way into this job with a nonprofit called Village Enterprise, and they provide at this point it's $150, but at the time it was $100 grants to entrepreneurs who had never, were even still too early for a micro loan.
What was how long did you spend living in Africa that
I
first
spent
time?
like 3.5 months. It wasn't that much.
What was the biggest thing you took away from it, the biggest thing you learned, or?
I heard these stories firsthand, and every story was different. Every story was, to me, I'm kind of a junkie for these stories, but every story was special. I'd meet 20 goat herders in a row, and all of them were so interesting and amazing to me. And I thought, along with my co-founder Matt, hey, what if we put these stories online? Every one of them individually, not, hey, donate to a person like this goat herder, but here's Joseph Onyango. He needs $425. He lives in this village. He needs the loan right now. Will you help him specifically? And here's Jane. She's a fishmonger, and she needs $300 right now. Will you help her? And will you lend instead of donate? That was the basic idea for Kiva, to tell these different stories of poverty and potential, more like it, and of entrepreneurship, and to ask our friends and family really to lend money, not give, but to lend little bits at a time, as much as they could afford, and to get paid back, ideally.
So I want to take us up for a second, then we're going to come back to your timeline. One of the things I think is really fascinating. So let's figure out a little bit more about everyone here. So How many of you right now are actively running your own company? Right? And how many of you, whether it's your own company or not, work in tech? And how many of you, either in the last 6 months or in the next 6 months going forward, have or are looking to raise money? All right, so we have a lot of entrepreneurs here. We have a lot of folks in tech. Obviously, fast forwarding, you're also someone that's really integral in you've been really integral in the tech community, both down here and in Silicon Valley. A lot of folks are ambitious and driven about building products that get lots of users and raising lots of capital and having exits. How do you think about balancing how do you think about balancing all those ambitions with your worldview of, hey, let's try to do social good in everything we do? And what perspective do you have for folks, for all of us in the room that are working and trying to build these companies, a lot of them in tech? How would you apply the lessons that you've learned to the situations that we're in right now?
I come back to starting with, who do you want to serve? Who are they? Very specifically, who's a real person that you would like to help? And help, I use, loosely, but what do you think they need? What's the best way to get that done in the world? And there's a lot of ways to do it, ways that are beneficial to, the earth, to other people, and not so much. So how do you want to get it done? How do you want to deliver that product or service to the person that you want to serve? And then start doing that and figure, don't be obviously intellectually lazy about how to make that work financially. I think, so I don't know if this is helpful, but since a lot of people, you asked the question about raising money, I look at, the for-profit businesses, obviously, you have the buyer and the seller, they're the same thing. If I make a t-shirt and you want it, you buy the t-shirt from me and you receive it. You're the recipient of the actual product and you've given me the cash to do that. Maybe for a nonprofit, it's a slightly different process, right? Maybe I want to give t-shirts to these people here in the audience and I need you to be my donor for that. So the feedback mechanism is a little bit different. Who knows if they're really good T-shirts for these wonderful individuals? We have to figure that out. But you're serving both the recipient of the product and service you're making and the donor to figure out if, it help them understand really what their money is doing. So I guess I think about at the end of the day, at the beginning and the end of the day, who is it that you want to serve? How do you do that best? And just start doing that. And if you're smart about it, you can capture the value that you're creating in the world, whether from people who believe in the work that you're doing or from the buyer, him or herself.
How much capital did you raise for Kiva?
So we didn't raise any at the beginning. I know this is being recorded. Maybe we'll talk about some edits, but I'll just put it out there. So at the very beginning, I had scholarships for business school, and I used those to pay staff. Sorry. And it was a great source of debt. And then we eventually...
This is why I kept joining more and more school programs to take. It's I joined 9-degree programs.
School is good. But we ended
By the way, I did the same thing for DocStock. I used student loans to build the first version of the product.
I mean, it's so do as I say, not as I do, though. I feel terrible because I wouldn't recommend it, but that's what we felt like we had to do at the time. We eventually had donors, just a few at a time, who were able to, fund us. But and then eventually, what's really lovely to think about in the first few years. So at the very beginning, people didn't understand that what we were offering to them was this experience of lending, not donating. So we couldn't put donation options on the site. People got super confused.
What was the average loan amount?
At the beginning it was 25 or 50, and it's it was these levels.
And what were common use cases of
the loan?
Who you were lending to for what they were doing?
Sure. So a taxi driver who needed funding to repair something on the car. I say goat herder because it's very real. A goat herder who wanted to buy 10 more goats. A chicken farmer who wanted to buy 100 chicks. A farmer who wanted to rent an ox, a plow and an ox.
The recipients of the loans early on, where were they all based mostly?
At the very first round, the first 7 were in Tororo, Uganda. The next round was throughout Uganda. The next round was, I feel like the next few rounds started to get to be Kenya, Tanzania, throughout East Africa, and then we just expanded. Our first 5 partners were sort of scattered all around the world based on just who we could beg to work with us. Because this was pre-business school, and my pitch was hey, this is a really fun social experiment. Don't you want to be involved? Not, we have 0% debt capital for you, which is very valuable. What do you say? And lenders will take on default risk and currency exchange risk, and we got to that later. But
so how long did you run Kiva before you raised any outside capital?
I mean, we got donations from our family members at the very beginning, so we had little bits coming in, but we weren't even a real nonprofit for the first year. We didn't incorporate for a while. And then finally, after a year or two, we started. It's so different with the nonprofit model because at first we were doing it on nights and weekends whenever we could. And then it started to take off, and we had to quit our day jobs. Well, literally for Matt and for me after business school, that's what I did. So we made it work. We patched it together. There was nothing off limits to throw into the fire of fueling Kiva, our dream. The first logo, this is funny, we didn't have any money, so Matt had this old guitar, and his friend who happened to be a graphic designer really liked the guitar, so we gave him the guitar so he would design our logo that just got updated 3 weeks ago. And it's 11 years in. But begging and borrowing were very central.
How many loans has Kiva done?
I know that the total loan amount, the total loans facilitated is, do you know this, Rachel? It's a rounding, it's right around 900 million right now. It's almost on the big 1 billion mark. And it's in these $25 bits. Yay, lenders. Yeah. But it's the first year, I'd like to talk about the trajectory. The pilot round of loans was $3,000, 35 or 3,100, I think. Then the first official year was 500,000. The next year was 15 million. The next year was 40. Next year 100, and on. So it's about to cross $1 billion in the next few months.
So one thing that's interesting, and obviously for a very different purpose, and you have an angle that a lot of people don't have, but a lot of folks in here have products that they're working on that they're trying to get the word out about.
Yeah.
Right. They're trying to get distribution. They're trying to get headspace. How did you get so many people? I mean, I just remember all of a sudden. I remember it's just it was all of a sudden everyone I knew was talking about Kiva. At this period of time. How did you build such marketing awareness for what you were doing?
So I was the chief marketing officer, and we had 0 budget, and I felt like most of my job, just to fess up here, was turning people away. because we often had too much traffic, we had too much interest, demand for loans, then we had a supply chain of actual loans to put on the site. I think that was nurtured by not thinking about, the numbers, but thinking about specific experiences. I keep coming back to this. I mean, thinking about what would be the details about the goat herder's life that would be interesting to talk about for a would-be lender. Should we have loans that are like $5,000 or $10,000 on the site early on, or would that not feel significant enough to somebody who just has $25 to chip in? Wouldn't they rather be a part of something where it's 10 or 12 people, or 20 people, a $300 or $500 loan?
What year was Kiva started again?
2005. October
What was
2005.
so fascinating about it is you look at all these, you look at all the crowdfunding and every one of these platforms now is so ubiquitous, and you all were really right there at the very beginning of it.
Yeah, we
for
didn't
a
even use
nonprofit
the word
angle.
crowdfunding. We didn't.
Yeah.
That word was like a few
But
years later.
Indiegogo, I mean, every single
Yeah.
platform you go down the line, I mean, they really replicated what you did in a for-profit model.
I remember Danae coming into our Indiegogo founder, one of the co-founders came into our office and she was talking about this idea they had. It was first for movies. That's indie films. That's why I called indie. And yeah, it was a few years in. We didn't fully realize we were on the beginning of that wave. But
So as part of marketing, you got a lot of press. You got a ton of it, and
we
obviously
got a lot of press, which
great
was
mission.
good and bad, because then we would have like 2
But
years.
do you have any thoughts? And I'm going to come back.
No,
to
no,
it.
no, it's
Do you have
great.
any tips or tricks for the folks here? And you gave a good one, which is to give really specific examples of what
Yeah.
it is you're trying to do. Tell that story in more detail. I think you and your husband are amazing. Obviously, you both understand press extremely well. For folks here that are trying to get the word out about what they're doing, how would you think that they should think about how to interact with press, how to get press? If you were their coach, what would you tell them to do?
I would say just figure out your story, tell it authentically. That's the most important thing, first and foremost. Don't make stuff up, but tell it authentically and get other people to be able to tell their story too, and make it as important as your own story about the thing that you're doing. So one of the fun things to look at in Kiva is all the crazy, there's so many permutations of these human interest stories, right? You can have like the CEO in Oregon lending to the women who are in prison in Kenya doing their first entrepreneurial ventures. And you can have the stay-at-home mom in Atlanta lending to somebody in Cambodia who also has 4 kids, and she really relates to her. And you
But
can
did
have
the
the
press
kids.
always just come to you? Did you have to go out and hustle to get it?
To be totally honest, they came to us like Oprah called us, and we were like, "Is this a joke?" We thought it was, it was Harpo. It was Harpo Studios, but that was 2 years in. I don't know how to go get Oprah. That was a fluky, amazing gift, and then other stuff followed. But press is just one thing. I mean, it's better to have organic growth. It's better to have viral, spreading of what you're doing, because when you have press, you have these huge spikes in traffic, and then maybe it levels out and there's a new normal. But we often couldn't keep up with those huge spikes. Like the site crashed. It was out for a week. We just had a splash page for a week after that Oprah thing.
Wow.
And it was great because we said, hey, we're a tiny nonprofit. Instead of lending, come back later, but will you donate so we can get bigger servers? And we raised $100,000 in the first few days of donations, which, as I mentioned, we didn't do at the beginning. So that was a big deal for us. So honest to God, I mean,
So if you
it
do
was
get
very
on Oprah, buy more
serendipitous.
servers. That's one
Yeah.
takeaway.
Reza's I won't even go there, but Reza just did a Super Soul Sunday. And so they're like BFFs right now. It's very cute. So, but 10 years ago, that just happened, and we said yes to everything that we could.
As you transition from, a social warrior, someone that was a pure do-gooder, to now you're responsible for this massive business, what was that transition like, and what were some of the key business lessons you learned, even with a social mission still driving you?
Well, it's funny you mentioned, because my book covers most of it. It actually really does. So I felt like what was so fun for me was going back to business school after Kiva had started, learning in the classroom and finding language for all this stuff that we were observing real time, like trying to steward Kiva into, existence and then into adult maturity. I'd say some basic lessons. One is, as I've said I'll say it one more time, focus on the person you want to serve, be obsessed with them, know them deeply. Don't just ask them questions about what they do and what they are experiencing, but watch them, sit back and watch them, because people often tell you something different than what they actually do in the experience. Know your values, make everyone in your company memorize your mission statement, your values, have everyone know exactly what you're about, because the more that they know that, the more freedom you can give them, the more independence you can give them to go manifest those things and implement them without having to say the how of, you can tell them what needs done, and then they can figure out the how to get it done in ways that will map with your values. And then empower others to do the same. So, like I said, yes, press helped, but the best thing was when a lender would be excited about what had happened. So President Clinton got really excited about Kiva. We'd never really had any sort of formal agreement with him, but he started to talk about Kiva randomly. And we'd see these crazy spikes in traffic, and we would Google, we would try to figure out what had happened, and it would be President Clinton talking to Christiane Amanpour about how great Kiva was. So he became a lender with a very big megaphone. So serve your lenders, serve your customers, serve the people that you want to serve, and do that really, really well, and give them ways to be empowered and to be involved and to actually have influence. So another thing that Kiva's done well, I think, since the beginning, somewhat by accident, is because we needed to, has been to involve people in a very intimate at a very intimate level. So we have hundreds of these translators, for example, in the Kiva Translator Program, who every day, maybe they spend 2 hours a week on the site logging in and translating postings, of entrepreneurs and their loan needs, translating them into, from Swahili into English or whatever the language is, so that the majority of Kiva lenders can read them and understand them. And it's not like they're triple checked by a paid staff member. They're just translated and they go live, and that's what happens. And because we have this wonderful world of volunteers, thousands at this point, Kiva's been able to get so much more done than it would have otherwise. So I think it really actually include your users, the people that your community of supporters, and actually give them responsibility. Really actually do it. Ask them what they think, and then do what they say they think. Don't just ask for their opinion and say, great, but we're making the product this color anyway, even though you like purple or whatever. Do what they want, because that's what you should be about.
So let's talk about the Pro-Funder chapter.
Yeah.
What year did you start that business?
So Pro-Founder started, right, I think 2008, I think. So after I left Kiva a few years in, I had a very momentous conversation with a former business school classmate, Dana Moriello, and we basically asked the question. I feel like all the good things that I've gotten to be a part of in my life start with good questions. And one of the questions that we asked was, why is it so hard to participate in my business school classmates' race?
What's one of your favorite questions to ask people? What's a question that's your
I'm
go-to
just going to say,
question?
who do you want to serve? I'm going to go back to that again.
Yeah.
But another one, if I had to do secondary and tertiary, would be okay, I brought this up earlier too, but what currency really matters to you? What currencies matter? And to think about not just making sure that you're designing your life to receive those things and to capture that kind of value, like flexibility with our kids. And my life right now, flexibility is my number one thing. It's also really nice to make money when I can. The first thing would be working with people that I really believe in and that I want to be around during my waking hours. So think about the kind of currencies that you really value and make sure that not only are you getting that for yourself, but you're designing that for all the people around you. Because I think people just assume that others want financial incentives, but there are a ton of other ways that people feel valued and want to, receive compensation, receive payment for what they're doing.
What currencies are important to you?
Yeah.
All right, so it's 2008. Let's go through that process.
Yeah, we start to ask, why is it so hard to invest in the small businesses we love? And it turns out there are a lot of laws, which I think I'm going to decide not to bore you with. But in short, what we did was for Pro-Founder, we built this sort of, if you could imagine a Kickstarter for businesses, but really. A lot of organizations say that, and it's not really the case. It's only, they create a way for only accredited investors, depending on how you slice it, 3 to 13% of the population to invest in small businesses or startups that they're excited about, but not for everybody. But we really built something for everybody to invest in the small businesses and the startups that they wanted to support.
And these were equity investments.
They were mostly, you could do either. It was this magical sort of, kind of Mad Libs questionnaire that we asked the entrepreneurs. How much do you want to raise? we asked them about their cash flow. We asked them about whether they wanted to give ownership away or not, et cetera, et cetera. And then poof,
And
we
was
would
this
create
mostly
this
for
legally
U.S.
compliant-
businesses, or?
It was only U.S. We had to map it took a year and a half to map in 5 legal teams to map all 50 states. But basically we said, you can either make an agreement on rev share, which makes sense for most small businesses, like real small businesses. Or you could do it equity, but equity doesn't make sense for a lot of them when there's not gonna be a liquidity event. And we allowed entrepreneurs to, violence toward bugs, to design the kind of terms that they wanted and then raise money online in a very Kickstarter-esque way with a little page where they could tell their story with the video and then invite people in to invest.
How many years was that journey for you?
We ended up doing that for 3 years. When I was 8.5 months pregnant with our first 2 children, our twins, and when the Jobs Act started to become a twinkle in the eye of legislators, we decided, and when we had like the first 7 meetings with what probably would have been our Series A funder, we actually ended up to shut it down. First, we went on life support for a while, and then we ended up shutting ProFounder down for a variety of reasons, mostly because we saw that the Jobs Act, and in particular Title IV with the crowdfunding exemption, was becoming a reality. We thought that's better for the world than this Frankensteinish thing that we had to cobble together based on previous legal precedent, where, okay, I'll say one not too boring sentence about it, but basically, to allow the maximum number of people, aka unaccredited investors, to invest in your small business or your startup, you have to cobble together what we used. For any that are, I see some people nodding, which is very encouraging to me, but we used Reg D, Rule 504 in most states, and you would basically come onto the site and say, I want to raise $45,000 for my, the cafe that I want to start on the corner, and I'm going to raise money from my friends in these 30 states, and we would say, great, here are all the forms that you need to fill out. Here's the maximum number of people that you can invite based on the fact that you want to get somebody from Connecticut in your deal, because Connecticut is terrible for these laws. Colorado's amazing, Connecticut's bad, California's in the middle, et cetera. So we had mapped it all out. And we saw the Jobs Act coming and saw the crowdfunding exemption and thought, this is way better because you can raise up to $1 million from an unlimited number of people, unaccredited or accredited. And by the way, unaccredited is, accredited is, are you ridiculously wealthy and you have a lot of liquid assets? And unaccredited is like 90+% of the population, like most people. Mm-hmm. And they're not allowed to play, and it's ridiculous because somebody a lot of somebody's decided at some point that also there's a correlation between whether or not you're accredited and sophisticated. There's this designation of being a sophisticated or unsophisticated investor, and it pisses me off so much, but there's this correlation between wealth and intelligence that is assumed in all of these laws, and it makes me so mad, and so that's what we made ProFounder to, change. But the crowdfunding exemption came, which is great. And
Looking back a couple years afterwards, is there anything you do different?
I know it's not really. Is that good enough for now?
It's
okay.
Solid. It's
great. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. Would you have done anything different looking back on that experience? What are the biggest things that you learned in those 3 years of running that business? And
so we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And I knew that. We knew it, and we were 3 years early for, what could have been. But between 2010, 2011, when we shut things down and my twins were born, and now, we didn't want to wait for a few years for the world to change and for the SEC to get its act together to make rules around those laws that were passed years ago. So we shut it down, and I'm very glad we did. I actually think it was the most responsible thing we could have done with our previous and would-be investors' money. We didn't take the Series A. We said no, and I went and got to focus on being a mom, which I would never trade.
How much had you raised up until then?
1.5, or 1.4.
Yeah.
But I mostly, I don't have any regrets. But I think what I would have done differently was probably, I actually feel really confident about the decisions we made. But what I learned a few things. So one, I should have known this from the Kiva experience, 0% loans, and people still flock to do that. They don't need the actual, this is back to the currency thing too, I didn't plan this, but they don't need the financial incentive to participate. They're happy to chip in $25, $50, $100 and get that back interest-free and feel like they had a really nice experience throughout the process. We worked so hard to make sure that with ProFounder that somebody's $100 contribution had all the paperwork behind it and all the legal stuff taken care of so that someday maybe you can make $104 or something like that, right? And I think it's worth it. I think from a moral standpoint, it's really good now that everyone can participate in these early stage raises. But practically speaking, I think a lot of people just wanted to feel ownership, to feel like they were meaningful participants in the birth of some great startup or some great small business, to actually go through all the rigmarole to have an equity agreement with somebody who had a $100 investment.
So when you
I don't know that was, I don't want to say worth it, but I want to say something just short of worth it. That was a lot of work to make sure that those individuals had that legal ownership, when I think there are other ways to do it, which is, I think, why Kickstarter and Indiegogo work.
So let's talk about that. AngelList, Kickstarter, Indiegogo.
They're not in the same category.
No, I know. But
okay.
What do you think of those businesses? And what do you? So a big topic.
But AngelList is here for the same old. God bless them, wealthy accrediteds. That's right. Mm-hmm. And then yes, Kickstarter and Indiegogo and others are over there for anybody.
What do you think? So right, you've spent time on the professional investing side.
Yeah.
What do you think? A lot of people are talking about the fact that the way that people raise money for companies, whether they're going to be venture-backed companies or small businesses or something in between, is going to meaningfully change, because now people, the Jobs Act passed, right? So you don't have to be an accredited investor.
It's a good thing, yeah.
The rule for accredited investing was that you needed either as a couple to make $500,000 a year, as an individual to make $250,000, or have assets of $1 million.
Yeah.
Of $1 million, not including your home. Now, that doesn't need to be the case. Anybody, pretty soon can start investing. Play it forward 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Are we going to see a lot more AngelLists and Kickstarters and Indiegogos? What do you think the investing world's going to be like now that there's access to virtually everybody as an investor?
I think scope will matter more than ever. I think it'll be very niche. I remember with Kiva, we started, and one of the organizations we admired a lot was Global Giving, and they still exist. And you could give; it wasn't lending, but you could give to, whether it was give $3 or $300 or $300,000, whether it was you as an individual or a company, any issue under the sun. It was very broad, just a platform discovering and forgiving, and a very great thing. But we did this very focused thing, and I think more and more the crowdfunding sites that will work will be focused. They will know their audience so well, and they will have the right scope in terms of not just issue areas and types of businesses and types of stage of businesses, but also the kinds of investments and the kinds of investments, not just financially but otherwise, as I said, like the kinds of returns that make sense for people who are investing, say, in film versus anything else, or in food businesses versus anything else, or in local stuff. The benefits that people might want, the rewards that investors will want will be very different depending on who they are and what they're investing in. So I think scope will matter a lot more.
Yeah. So let's talk about the book for a little bit.
Okay.
Kind of a combination of both your own personal lessons and what you saw from the different platforms you were working on. Talking about it, breaks down a lot of the different stories of the individual entrepreneurs. There was one, the woman that built her stand in the middle of a road so that literally the folks couldn't go. What was the impetus to do the book, and what are the big things people get out of it by reading it?
So there are a lot of reasons. I mean, married to my amazing author husband, I saw the power that his writing had in many people's lives, and I felt I caught the bug. I wanted to, I was speaking a ton, and I wanted to put that stuff down on paper and allow for that to be sort of a carrier of the ideas and the lessons that I learned. I think what I get most excited about, yes, I talk about my own story, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to do that, but I also talk about, in between each chapter, sort of a case study of an entrepreneur who I've met along the way who has taught me something meaningful and valuable at the right moment in time, in a sort of magical, like Slumdog Millionaire-esque way, right? And so the person that you referenced, for example, was a woman who I met in Tanzania, and you have the highways, you have city centers, you fly into Dar es Salaam, you have the roads that turn into, sort of dirt roads that turn into paths. And there are cities, obviously, and then trading centers, and then just sort of random shops. And she had her sort of random shop, not on the side of the road like everyone else I'd ever seen, but right smack in the middle of the path. So you had to like walk around her. And the reason she had done that, so she could actually like kind of be in their faces, in the faces of her customers, but so she could have conversations with them and know them. And she was all about this theme that I've discussed actually already of, meeting individuals, knowing them and understanding them deeply. So her shop looked very different than a lot of the other shops that I had seen, because she knew that one of the people in her village really liked this particular kind of shampoo. So she had this like random bottle of shampoo in there that like you wouldn't see anywhere else. And she had, several different kinds of soap based on the kinds of soap that different families wanted. She had not just cooking oil, but she would sell the cooking oil in little baggies, like a tablespoon or two at a time, because she knew some of the families, it wasn't like just buy this jug of stuff. It was, I will sell you, the amount that you can afford day to day. So she's just one of many that I met, but I loved that she knew the importance of understanding her specific customers, and her store was designed for, I swear she could have just put a name on every product in that store.
What are some lessons? So some folks, right, in all the chronicling and personal experience you've had with folks that are doing entrepreneurship, at the level that you've been talking about, and for their own survival, and they think about it in that way, what are some of the lessons that you learned from them that maybe would be applicable to everybody here that are maybe trying to build a larger scale growth company? Like, what are those universal lessons that you learned from the folks that you chronicle in the book that everybody here could benefit from?
So there are many. Let me think about the ones I want to highlight. So let's think. Well, let me tell one story, the story that inspired the name of the book. I met a gentleman about 11 years ago on one of my first, this 3.5 months visit where I begged my way into the job and throughout East Africa with Village Enterprise. So I met a gentleman who, as he began to tell me his story, he talked about the beginning. He talked about having fled the northern area of Uganda to, come to a border town on the border of Kenya and Uganda. And he sort of had fled because a rebel group had attacked his village. And he escaped with his brother, but like nothing else. The clothes on his back, and that was it. And he was he had lost his family in this attack. He lost his home. They lost all of their material wealth, etc. And so he sort of resettled with these distant cousins because he wanted to be near any family that he could, and had to start over as an uneducated, orphaned, no shoes on his feet, teenager. And he didn't have anything. But he knew that that didn't mean, becoming nothing in the world. He knew that he could still use his mind and use his determination to build something. And so he, we talk about roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty, but he literally dug in, as he described his story to me, he dug into the earth, first with his hands, then with like some sticks and scraps of metal, etc. And he dug into the earth until he found clay deposits, and he mixed the clay with water, and he formed these bricks. And they were like these rough, kind of misshapen, crumbling apart bricks, but he made them, and he made ones good enough. He practiced, he made ones good enough to sell. He sold them for fractions of a penny each, and he saved that money up, and he did it again and again and again and again, just digging into the ground beneath his feet. And eventually he was able to buy, save up to buy wood to make a brick mold, and he could make 2 bricks at a time, and the bricks were more evenly and consistently sort of shaped and sized, so he sold those for a little bit more. And he dried the bricks in the sun, which was great, but he knew that they would sell for more if he could fire them in a kiln. So he saved up more money, went to a nearby village, learned how to make this kind of self-contained kiln where he'd stack the bricks around a fire and bake them so they were harder and stronger. He sold those bricks for more, and on and on and on. He just kept getting better and better and better. And by the time I met him, just a few years into his business, he had several employees and had built a whole new home for himself and his brother out of these bricks that he had pulled from the earth with his own hands. So I've met a lot of entrepreneurs in my life, Silicon Valley, Great Rift Valley, everywhere in between. And people like him, like Patrick, I don't know, I think what they can do with so little, what he did with so little, it blows me away. And I think about that when I feel stuck. And I think about it, to be honest, when I talk to entrepreneurs who are grumpy because they could only raise, 1.5 instead of 2 million or whatever it is. There's always a way forward. And actually, to be on my soapbox for like 30 seconds. So something I talk about in the book as well, one of my favorite definitions, at least academic definitions of entrepreneurship, is Howard Stevenson's. And he talks about entrepreneurship as the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. And some of you, I'm seeing some friends in the audience, have heard this before from me, but this, I think it's so romantic and wonderful and sort of takes my breath away. But this pursuit of the thing that you want to make real in the world without regard to resources controlled, and I don't know if Howard Stevenson would say all this, but I say all this. So without regard to what you have, what you don't have, if you feel like at any given moment you're too old or too young or don't have the right education or don't know the right people, whatever it is, there's always an excuse. But great entrepreneurs pursue that thing anyway. They pursue what they want to build in the world, come hell or high water, and they figure out a way forward. And the people that I wrote about in the book are those people that embody that.
So and I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and we'll open it up to everybody. You got the chance to be on the other side, right? And so you've been doing
Yes.
professional investing for a while. What are the qualities that you look for in folks that you invest in, and what do you think are the big mistakes people make as they're pitching their businesses or they've been pitching you? Like, why did you invest in the companies you did, and why did you pass on companies that you did?
Good question. The people that I am always drawn to are authentic. They're not trying to be something other than exactly who they are.
So I'm gonna pause for a second.
Okay.
Let's dig into this for a second.
Okay.
How do you know when someone's being authentic? What does that look like to you? And I think there's a lot of times folks feel like, okay, well, I feel like I'm being authentic, and
Yeah.
maybe that's not the case. Because you've said that a couple times. How do you know when someone's actually being authentic with you?
I think if you can ask them about the before and the before, I don't know, ask them about the trajectory of their story, ask them about their intentions, ask them about the touchy-feely stuff, right? Their motivations, their dreams. What happens if you don't raise this money? What are they going to do? What happens if they, have more demand than they thought they would have? What happens? I don't know. Just kind of push on their story a little bit and see how it holds up. And if it's a whole thing, if it's not just consistent, but like if it feels like they'd stand behind it no matter what. And by the way, like I don't mean, one thing I don't like is people who are so diehard and so extreme that they're not reasonable and rational and say, yeah, look, I wouldn't like sell my firstborn child for this business, that my child is more important or whatever. That's a good thing, I think. But I think people who, it feels like the recent past, at least, if not much farther back, has kind of led them to that moment, led them to create, be creating what they want to create and to kind of take those next steps in their path. Not to put judgment on them and say, no, I don't think you should be taking this path or making that choice, but if it feels like it draws on who they've been in the past.
Are there other mistakes in going through the process and then being on the other side of the table, are there mistakes you feel like consistent mistakes you see people make in the fundraising process?
I mean, it's just so tough because most business plans are like, huh? Like just guessing. I think you mostly can tell about a person's ambition and a person's, again, ability to just think critically when you see their projections, because I don't think projections mean much of anything. I think it is meaningful when people have built as much as they can on their own. It doesn't have to be backbreaking, or you don't have to have a person be a martyr for what they're doing, but have they done all they can do up until this point without the funding? Another lesson I have to say that I have seen in the past in other entrepreneurs that I admire and that I write about in the book, and that I like seeing in the entrepreneurs that, Collaborative has funded, et cetera, is this ability to, figure it out even when there's been a barrier, in particular financial barriers. So there's a woman I wrote about, her name is C.C. Sayer, and she had a whale watching business actually in San Diego. And she was raising money on ProFounder and had emailed and called and kind of blasted all of her friends, family, and community members that she could, and still wasn't at the amount of money that she needed. But she had her budget written out on the ProFounder sort of listing. And one of the items, the biggest item, was this boat that she needed, this particular kind of boat. And she'd shared those items and what what she needed financially to get there. But a friend of hers had remembered this particular boat, and the day before she was about to shut her raise down because she hadn't made enough to go forward, a friend saw like in a laundromat one of these tear sheets, like a person was selling that exact boat for $40,000 or something less than CC thought that she would need to pay. So he called her the next morning, and she was able to figure out how to get this boat for a lot less money. I've seen other entrepreneurs do this again and again, where they figure out, whether they give their old guitar to design a logo, or they can't pay for full-time developers, so they talk to their friends that work at Google and Facebook and whatever else, and they have a pizza party on a Saturday night to have them design a feature for them. And I've seen people figure it out, and that is really meaningful to me.
Well, it seems like one of the really meaningful lessons is, the folks that you're chronicling in the book and that you've worked with, they probably much more so than most of us just expect life to be very hard day in and day out, and they expect everything to be a struggle. And I think when you have that mentality, you're willing to do more and go further and try longer. And I think that's maybe something that, a lot of people in the tech community could be better well served with, which is, you hear the stories of companies selling for billions of dollars. You think it's going to be so easy. We consider ourselves all smart and we all have egos. And then you get into it and it's often much harder than what it seems like from the outside. And I think having the perspective that things are going to be really hard and that it's going to be a dogfight sometimes can serve us well. And I think you did a good job of reflecting that.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I think if you understand somebody's values, there's going to be changes along the way. They'll have to pivot. They'll just have to change course. But if you know that there's somebody who has this vision, they want to get there, and they're going to figure out the how if they know what they believe and what they're about. And then that's somebody that I would want to bet on.
That's awesome. All right, well, let's do this. We're going to take some time for some questions. We don't have I don't know if we have a mic we can pass around. Do you want? All right, great. Do me a favor when you ask a question, say your name, what company you're with, and if it's something silly or stupid, I'm going to call you out for it. So bring your A game.
Yeah, no pressure, right? David Bloom with Fabric Media. I'm just curious, your assessment of where the crowdfunding space is now, particularly on the nonprofit side, the microfunding, some of that stuff, and how it's developed over the last 10 years. I mean, Eunice has had his Nobel Prize. He's had the almost inevitable pushback on him, et cetera, et cetera. We've got, was it A+ or whatever the regulations are now, the SEC rules. So what's your assessment of where the space is, what the opportunities are, and what that means for entrepreneurs? I mean, is this just an open field, or is there some challenges that they still face in trying to raise money?
Yes, to both of the latter two questions. I think in so many ways we're right at the beginning. I think it's going to be the same as it always has been in terms of who's going to succeed, who's going to fail. You have to figure out how to differentiate, figure out how to tell your story in a unique, meaningful way, figure out how to reward people and thank people and include people, allow them to participate in ways that, again, just that fit, that are a match for who you're inviting in, and that are new and exciting. Sorry, water break.
Or wine.
I'm going to do water. So I know that's kind of high level in general, but the people that get ahead in any anything, but at any phase, especially at the beginning, like we are somewhat at the beginning of crowdfunding, sorry, will figure out how to be creative and not break the rules, but call attention to themselves and make it fun, make it interesting, make it new and different. Within, using the platforms that exist.
Let's try this without the mic. I think it'll help some people in the back. Who else?
Yeah, just shout it. I can repeat the question too.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
So, what's
Say
the
name and
sorry,
company.
Mark
Yeah.
Jeffrey, Guardian Circle.
By the way, Mark's a very well-known guy in the LA Tech. Been part of a lot of iconic companies. He's got a great app called Guardian Circle that helps you stay safe by having a network of people that you can alert you in case you get in trouble in any case. So I'd go down. It's on iOS and Android. All right, go download Guardian Circle.
So my question is also about crowdfunding. Yes, the Jobs Act has allowed for non-accredited investors to invest. However, the accounting requirements that are then put upon the company to accept those investments, it's sort of quasi going public in a way.
Yep.
It seems onerous, and it seems like a lot of companies won't do it. I actually they actually, is this meaningful progress, or is the Jobs Act really not enough to allow unaccredited investors to truly invest the way accredited investors?
Okay. So the question, I'll just repeat, is did the Jobs Act go far enough, or is there more to do to help unaccredited investors invest in businesses?
I wish the process was simpler, period. I wish that it was. I wish there was more trust. I don't want to get too touchy-feely that we all had with each other and the government had with us and with all the unaccrediteds out there. I think I'm really glad, though, that this is. I think it's a very good first step. And I think we should ask ourselves the question, as I sort of touched on, well, not touched on, but I alluded to before, what is the right fit? Is there a bit of a mismatch? Like, do you want 1 million investors each chipping in $1 for your seed raise? Like, is that a really good thing? I don't know. Is it better to do what often is done on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and that sort of thing? Is it better to do a pre-sale of your product? Is that just a better way to go? If ownership is really that important, then sure, I'm glad that at least that can happen now. But I wonder sometimes if people have been too excited about crowdfunding for equity, for a small business that will never have a liquidity event, $35,000 from 47 people. Like, I'm glad that that is possible now. I also wonder if that is the best thing and the best fit for everybody.
I'm kind of curious, both you and your husband are authors. What do you think about crowdfunding for books, right? It's expensive to publish, to distribute, to market it. Do you think there's going to be a market for people that, obviously you both have a lot of fans and followers? Would you want to accept $50, $100, $500 checks to have them finance your next book project?
I think it'd be great.
I think we should start this company right now.
I thought I'd treat it as just
Pre-sale.
pre-sale, right? Like, that'd be fantastic. By the way, our joke is that I'm the entrepreneur that wrote a book. Rez is the author that's very entrepreneurial. So he's the legit. Do you want to answer it? Do you want to say something? Come on, participate. No?
Would you ever crowdfund for something you'd want to write in the future? Would you
Yeah.
crowdfund specifically
I think
around
I would.
a book?
I mean, look, I went the super traditional route. I went Random House, book agent, et cetera. And I think there would be a lot of value in pre-sale and getting interest and rallying people before it's written.
One
I think it's a good idea.
One of the things, I'm going to just stay on the book topic for a second.
Sure.
It's really important, right, in the process of selling a book, you got to get those first couple weeks that when it comes out to hit, get
Yeah.
it on the bestseller list. How do you...
If that's your goal, there are a lot of ways to look at it.
Yeah. How did you look at it, and what do you find are the ways to, early on drive those book sales?
I'm smiling because I'm thinking of Reza's methods and et cetera. For me, I felt like this was just this wonderful opportunity to tell my story, wonderful opportunity to tell the stories of other great entrepreneurs. Just getting it published was in and of itself, for me, very fulfilling. In terms of selling it and getting it on bestseller lists, to be totally honest with you, I feel like a lot of people just game the system and they figure out a way to get it done. And that's great because then it perpetuates the sale of the book in the future. And look, I'm speaking as a person married to a best-selling author who's had their book be #1, and I see what that does, and it's amazing. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to just make it available, put it out there, and the people who genuinely wanted to not just buy it but also read it, which is, you'd think it'd be the same thing, but it's often not. I wanted that to happen, so.
Well, I have a lot of gym memberships, and I don't go to the gym that
Right?
much
No,
these
it's that
days.
kind of thing. It's that kind of thing.
Other questions over here.
Hi. Great. Oh, great.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I was just wondering how you expanded from Africa to other countries. Because I lived in Kenya, and I know that the communication system, at least back then, was very rudimentary. So how did people hear about you?
The question is, how did Kiva expand from Africa to other countries?
So
And
there's
other
the
galaxies and planets.
And other planets. So to be, just in case some folks here have never been to the site, and to explain it one more time. So you have lenders that come to the site. There's kind of 4 components, right? Lenders that come to the website. There's 150-ish staff at this point in San Francisco in the office that you visited. There are microfinance institutions that actually then find borrowers and post those profiles on the site. So and that's the traditional Kiva way. There are other permutations of this at this point, Kiva Zip, et cetera. But just think lenders Kiva itself, these field partners, and borrowers. And so at first, Kiva was just in Kenya and Uganda and in East Africa because we had field partners that were in East Africa. Then we had field partners in other countries. We found usually the field partners in the beginning were microfinance institutions doing this very traditional micro-lending. Now there are all kinds of non-traditional partners. Some are just NGOs that do all sorts of other things but also provide loans. But so there are, I don't want to misquote, and the website's always smarter than I am on this, but let's say there are like 200-ish, 250-ish field partners all around the world. It started to turn into less of a sales pitch and more of a screening applications thing. For Kiva, I don't know, after the first year and a half or two, when the word got out that, hey, here was this site that, if you post a profile of your borrower, they will come and they will fund at 0% with all this friendliness and flexibility and forgiveness. They will provide the capital that you need to then lend to your entrepreneurs. So by the way that Kiva does this, lenders put in $25, it goes through Kiva untouched, it goes through the field partners untouched, and it goes into the hands of the borrowers untouched. So the 25 goes all the way through. Borrowers actually repay with interest that's fair and appropriate and set by those field partners. So let's say the $100 loan gets paid back as a $110 loan or $115 repayment over time. The $100, the principal is kept by the field partner, and the interest is kept by the field partner, and the interest kept, and the principal goes back through into the hands.
You're all going to be
eventually of the
quizzed on
borrower.
this, by the way.
Listen, if you lend 25, you get 25 back. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't get the interest that is actually charged. The servicer of the loan keeps that. That's the way it works. And the way that Kiva has spread is by working with amazing, qualified partners all around the world that are already out there doing this work. It's not like Kiva goes and finds the individuals one by one all over the world. In almost 90 countries at this point where there are borrowers.
So more of an aggregator.
Aggregator. But yes, I should have said that.
Let's do about one or two more questions over here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story today.
It's a pleasure.
I work for a food and beverage company called Alma, and I'm actually curious about your perspective on social entrepreneurship, more as a practice within entrepreneurship. Specifically, if you feel that a lot of social entrepreneurs these days are looking to scale.
Yeah.
Do you think the concept of scale within social entrepreneurship specifically is somewhat overdone, or specifically, if people are looking to scale too quickly, if that whole concept of scaling is
So we're saying, does the concept of scaling apply as much to social entrepreneurship? Cool, I gotcha.
I think it does, but I also think you need to know not just what your values are, but what your priorities are. When push comes to shove, which is more important to you? Is making more money important, or is serving more people important, or is serving people at a deeper level more important than serving more? I think you just need to be even more clear than an entrepreneur who hasn't asked these questions, but they will have to ask these questions at some point. You have to be more focused and smarter about that. One wonderful thing that I think is happening in the world is that I hope maybe someday we won't talk about social entrepreneurs. It'll just be back to everyone's an entrepreneur, but everyone has to ask and answer these questions about social impact because everybody has one. It's just a matter of, is it positive, negative, neutral? Have you asked yourself, what are you doing above and beyond financial sustainability? And with nonprofits, by the way, we say sustainability. That's the nonprofit word for profitability. It's the same effing thing. It's the same
nonprofits
thing.
are often much more profitable than for-profit companies these days.
Sometimes they are, right? So you have to ask and answer the same questions. I think social entrepreneurs, self-proclaimed social entrepreneurs, just ask and answer those questions earlier on. But everybody is going to need to answer them.
Well, we've talked.
Wait. My husband is participating. This is very exciting. What's that? What? Okay, thanks. So my husband wants me to tell you this story. So 2 years in to Kiva's story, there was a guy that called the office. And there's 8 or 9 of us in the office. It's one room, and everyone answers the phone. And it could be my mom. It could be a customer. It could be anybody. But I happen to be closest, so I answered. And it was this, when phones were shaped like this, not this. And it was this guy. I won't name names or companies or anything, but I pictured him as one of these guys who was hey. He's very, hey, one of the guys that would look over, and I'm short, so it's easy to do, but would like look over my shoulder if I'd meet him at a gathering. He'd be like, nice to meet you, and then look for someone cooler to talk to. But he was like, hey, love what you guys are doing at Kiva. I have this, $10 million in this new corporate social responsibility fund that my big company has just created, and I want to put it all into Kiva. What do you say? I mean, I'm paraphrasing. And I said, thank you so much. That's great. But what do you mean? Do you mean you want to divide this $10 million up among your clients and your customers and your staff and anybody you've ever met, and give them accounts on the site so they can go and have this experience of lending to another human being and reading their story and then getting updates and getting repaid, and it's so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And our mission, I reminded him, is to connect people through lending for poverty alleviation, but it's connecting people. The rest of the stuff is great too, but that's what we're about. And basically he was like, no, I don't have time to do that. I just want to dump it in and get it back, and then pat myself on the back and go on with my nice CSR initiatives. And on that same phone call, I said, well, thank you, but no thank you. And here's some other organizations you might want to go talk to. Because had we taken that, we'd only facilitated about 10, maybe $11 million at that time. Had we taken that money, it would have clogged up the system for individuals to come through and $25, $50, $100 at a time lend that $10 million over the next few months, which they did. In fact, so much so that we ran out of loans periodically over the following months. So I said, no, thank you, and hung up the phone, and he went on with his life, and I hope he's doing great. So I say that because Reza asked me to, number one, but also because I think it highlights we knew very clearly who we were, who we wanted to be in the world. We weren't about just raising money for microfinance. We were about providing this experience, providing this connection for other people to understand somebody else's story, not as a story of sadness and suffering and feel bad for me, poverty, but of strength and empowerment and entrepreneurship. And we wanted other people to connect with those entrepreneurs. So that's what we prioritized over getting a glut of money into the system in one fell swoop. Good
That's pretty
question.
amazing. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we talked a lot tonight about the importance of being authentic, and I would say of the 50 folks I've done this with, you're certainly up there in terms of the most authentic and most accomplished, and I think it's just been really amazing to hear, your life story and the stories of so many people that are in much more difficult conditions than we are, doing things that are really special and amazing, and how they apply to all of us. And so I just wanted to say a really big thank you, Jessica, for coming out and sharing your story with us tonight. And thank you, everybody here. I am going to try to get this series started back up, if not exactly on a monthly basis, as close to it as possible. Caroline in the back is going to be helping to organize the event. We have guests already filled
Caroline.
out.
She deserves some applause also.
Definitely. This was her first event, and I think she did a great job. We have guests booked through the next couple months, but we'll be looking for after that. And just really nice to see you all. I missed a lot of familiar faces, and for those of you here for the first time, I hope this is the first of a lot of events. Again, I'd encourage you to meet each other, spend time, have some drinks. They're serving dinner here. You can order dinner, hang out. I'll be here for a little bit while longer. Jessica, thank you so much for signing all the copies of the books for everybody. It was really just amazing. And if you get a moment, check out comparably.com. Hopefully it'll help you in your careers, both finding out what your market rate is, rating companies, and just looking forward to seeing you all throughout the rest of this year and for more stuff we're doing. So thanks, everybody, for coming out. And thank you again, Jessica.